Now we move on to session number 5. This session sounds somewhat different than what we've been talking about in the past because we're looking more at issues of Sabbath and leisure. And a lot of people think that that is in contrast to work, but I believe it's fulfillment of work. The outline that we'll be following is what do we mean by the Sabbath? What are the characteristics of the Sabbath for the STEM professions? What is the working life of STEM professionals? Historical perspectives on work, city and busyness, calling and vocation. The Sabbath, which of course in Jewish history was designated from Friday evening at sundown to Saturday evening at sundown, had many meanings. It was seen as law in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. It was a law that was mandated within the Ten Commandments, fulfilled by Jesus in Mark chapter 2, verse 28. It was also seen as a gift, that is, the celebration of creation and redemption. It's referred to as a blessing. You see this in Genesis chapter 2, Exodus chapter 10, Deuteronomy chapter 5. It was a vocation where you identified with God the Creator Himself. It's a calling. God rested on the day, and He invites us to sit by Him and rest also. It was a sacrament of time. In other words, it was a sign, a very special sign about God's eternal purposes, both past and future. You see that in Exodus chapter 31, 12 and 13, and verse 17. It was a metaphor of salvation. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9, and Matthew chapter 11, we are called to enter into our rest with God. It was a prophecy of hope. Hope in the new heaven, new earth. In other words, the Sabbath is our opportunity to play heaven, seen in Revelation chapter 21, 22. In this sense, it involves play, it involves peacemaking, and it involves prayer. The Sabbath was not intended as the cessation of activity, but the culmination of it, in its purest, most worshipful, most creative form. The 6 days flow into the Sabbath, and the Sabbath stirs the ground and replenishes the soil for the growth of the next 6 days. That happens, of course, in the biological sciences. It happens also in relationship to our own renewing. Indeed, Adam and Eve experienced the Sabbath after their creation, but prior to their work. It is also kind of like gestation, the creative pause, not unlike the 9 months that a fetus grows and develops prior to biological birth. The work of birth, the subsequent infant activities, are a culmination of the Sabbath rest, essential for healthy work later on. In other words, Sabbath precedes and is the impetus to work, as well as the fulfillment of work. It is not just the reward at the end of work. There's a little fiction book that I read many years ago that enchanted me. The title of the book was Mr. God. This is Anna. Anna is described in this book as a 6-year-old theologian, mathematician, philosopher, poet, and gardener. Her life and death are told charmingly in this book by, and the only name that's given is the name Finn, F-Y-N-N. Her insights dovetail with the understanding of the Sabbath that we're presenting here. And so Anna is interviewed, and this is what her response is. What was God's greatest creative act? It was the seventh day. Of course it was. The seventh day. No, He made rest. Yes, that's the biggest miracle. Rest is. When he was finished making all the things, Mr. God had undone all the muddle. Then you can rest. So that's why rest is the very, very biggest miracle of all. Don't you see? You have to have a muddle in your head before you really know what rest is. Perhaps, as Anna suggests, we need to absorb the muddle of God's creative power, of the 6 days of the week that will make our subsequent work meaningful. For those involved in the STEM professions, there's often a religious gestation of musing, of brooding into the deeper questions of life that ultimately stir the creative juices that follow into a lifestyle of work. This is what we might call the formative Sabbath that impels all subsequent work after it. Some of the characteristics that I have noted among STEM professionals as they go through this gestation, this period of Sabbath, involve the following: a sense of awe in the face of natural processes. Number 2, an appreciation of beauty in the designs of nature. Number 3, a spirit of curiosity that begs for answers. Number 4, an admission of humility in the face of infinity. Number 5, a thirst for transcendence to reach beyond what is seen. Number 6, a passion for creativity that desires to form something new. Number 7, an itch to make a significant contribution to the quality of life in general. And then once you've gone through this gestation period, then there is the breakthrough into work. The gestation period of rest or Sabbath in our imagined Eden. Then one plows into that work cycle. There are a number of suggestions that are adapted from the Lausanne documents, Lausanne publications, in what we call marketplace ministry. And the document is the occasional paper number 40. And we've included that as one of the supplementary readings that might describe those engaged in the STEM professions. STEM Christians can expand their understanding of spiritual disciplines to include activities more often associated with the everyday. Reclaim aspects of their work as spiritually significant when they see what they do as a reflection of God. Find support and fellowship in naming and responding to the presence of God in their work by linking with other Christians in similar professions or fields of work. Some of the suggestions that I have for the gathered life of the STEM people of God might be these. The gathered STEM people can reclaim their workplaces as a nexus for God's presence in the following ways. Number 1, by bringing everyday life experiences into the Sunday worship experience. Number 2, by celebrating the skills and gifts of their workplaces. Number 3, by providing places and relationships of accountability. Number 4, by providing preaching and teaching relevant to life in the STEM world. Number 5, by providing pastoral support for those engaged in the STEM professions. Number 6, by taking church to the workplace. There is, frankly, a religious bias against work. Much of Christian history tilts against work as being something unspiritual, unless, of course, it's work within the church context. It prioritized spiritual contemplation or service to others as superior to labor of other kinds. As such, it demeaned work. It ranked jobs in pecking order of usefulness, or dismissed its eternal purpose altogether. Other religious groups, such as the Puritans, ennobled work, but oftentimes removed spontaneity and play outside of its domain. In other words, it became an austere form of work. Both positions are wrong. Let's look at the relationship between spirituality and work. It was commonly believed that spirituality was incomparable or incompatible with the world of work. A Lausanne statement describes the two realities, both during the Middle Ages and today. On the one column, you've got the spiritual reality. And then if you look on the other side, you'll see the world of work. You'll see that these are almost polar opposites. For instance, spiritual reality would be withdrawal from the world. The world of work, it's engagement. Solitude versus community. Silence versus noise. Stillness versus movement. Serenity versus chaos. Simplicity versus complexity. Meditation versus multitasking. Order versus interruptions. Centered versus scattered. Focused versus busyness. Seriousness versus humorous. Quietness versus raised voices. I think you begin to get the impression that the real, genuine spirituality, of course, is on the left-hand side, and work just seems to be lacking in the character of spirituality. This is a false concept, but it's been one that's been held by so much of Christendom through the ages. By the 17th century, the influence of the Puritans was profound. They codified leisure with the following components. To them, leisure had to be lawful, reputable, profitable, glorifying to God, refreshing to bodies and mind, efficient, moderate in time and affections. Later on in the period of the Enlightenment, that is in the 18th and 19th centuries, depending on where one was evaluating, they saw the Enlightenment secularize the Protestant work ethic into a creed for personal success. And of course, the major luminary in this is Benjamin Franklin, who leads the cheerleaders. Another name, of course, is Adam Smith in his classic work called The Wealth of Nations, where he says, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard for their own self-interest we address ourselves, not to their humanity, but to their self-love." In other words, it's just very crass human ambition and human need that pushes us into work. So what do we see in terms of theology of work throughout Christian history? Well, the Industrial Revolution produced a whole new reality about work. It brought us the monotony of tasks, the inability to see work's results personally, the denial of satisfaction, depersonalization, anonymity in the work process, and with that, subsequently, the loss of pride. This produced a contrary reaction as seen in the emergence of Karl Marx, who said, A class must be formed which, in the dissolution of all classes, a sphere of society which has a universal character because of its sufferings are universal. This dissolution of society is what he calls, of course, the proletariat. So now we come to the technological age of the 20th century. Work has often devolved into meaninglessness. The worker finds himself powerless, isolated, self-estranged. On the other side of it, the 20th century has often been labeled the age of leisure. And what we've created is a leisure which has become secularized. Ironically, there's a decreasing amount of time for genuine leisure. The amount of genuine leisure is generally in inverse proportion to the amount of labor-saving machinery it employs. Reminds me of James Dobson, who described his effort to try to please his children. And so he bought himself a swing set. What he didn't realize was he had to put it together. Then it had to be placed in cement within the ground. The result was, at the end of several days of working on this project, of bruising his fingers, the medical care necessary for that, he said it wasn't that I owned the set, but that the set owned me. And so many times our leisure is very much bound up in that kind of a response. The intense busyness of the 20th and 21st century worker can be described in the following ways. We have full calendars. We professionalize our childhood. You see this now with little children that are being put into a beauty contests, working longer and harder, more things and more encumbrances, increasing complexity and regulation of corporate life. Those feelings that rush into us of guilt when we find ourselves inactive. And then, of course, competition with all those who are doing similar kinds of work that we are. James Houston has a very interesting quote. Work is the great narcotic that enables people to suppress many of their anxieties, the place where they can hide themselves from their own inner fears. It is an environment that favors the bureaucracy of work and action, or busyness simply for the sake of being kept busy. It is unreflective of the real issues of the life and death of the soul of man. Let's look at this term leisure. The term leisure comes from licere, which means to be permitted. The problems of leisure are these. One is compartmentalization. It cuts generationally. Youth is all study, mid-age all work, retirement all play. And so life is divvied up in this kind of fashion. Ambivalence. Within the Christian community, leisure and play are uncomfortably accepted, while workaholism is considered a religious virtue. There are additional failures to experiencing meaningful leisure. One is because both parents work outside the home, often genuine leisure is squelched. Interesting in that parents that come home at 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, tired, worn out. That's when the children are ready for action and activity and involvement. They've been home for 2, 3 hours. They're looking for engagement. Parents are looking for disengagement. Number 2, there's a loss of a sense of vocation that appropriately might include leisure and play. Number 3, leisure has become so commercialized that one has to work hard to finance play. That's very ironic. G.K. Chesterton suggests that healthy non-work or leisure opens the door to freedom. In other words, healthy leisure is the freedom to do something, to create your hobbies, your recreation. It's the freedom to do anything. It used to be that the automobile was more of a plaything than just utility. It was the freedom to do nothing. This opens the door to creative brooding, to meditation, to alternate realities. Remember when I lived in Brazil, many times I'd have to sit at bus stops, and being a young man, just to observe communities, the people getting on and off the buses, the traffic moving on by. But it created a certain kind of stimulation for my mind to brood and to think, especially as I was encountering new culture. And some of the maturing thoughts that have blessed me ever since have come out of those brooding experiences. Leisure, appropriately expressed, should provide diversion, provide relaxation and rest, personally restore oneself, and be transformative. We really need to have a theology of leisure. A biblical theology espouses an understanding of leisure. Number one, it gives a mandate to enjoy God's creation. It offers us grace in that it reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously. It reminds us that time is not a commodity, but rather a gift. Therefore, we avoid the compulsiveness of our personalities. We learn to savor time than to let time govern us. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 reminds us that there are temptations in leisure at three different levels. We can experience godless sensuality. There, of course, the phrase is good for food. To nurture oneself in inappropriate ways. Godless aesthetics, that is, delight to the eyes, to delight in those things that contaminate the spirit. And godless experience, where it says desired to make one wise, to experience that which was not intended for us. So we've got to apply some discipline to the way in which we acquire or experience leisure in our lives. There's a quotation by St. Augustine that reminds us of the boundaries of leisure. No one ought to be so leisured as to take no thought for the interest of his neighbor, nor so active as to feel no need for the contemplation of God. Let me supply some practical suggestions for programming appropriate leisure in your life. Number one, understand your own leisure style and needs. Are you compulsive? Are you passive? You might want to tailor leisure around to respond appropriately to your own style. Number two, choose free time over more pay. Number three, embrace both leisure and the Sabbath. Don't confuse the two of them. They each have their own distinct contribution to make in your life. Number four, choose edifying leisure over debilitating pleasures. Number five, choose leisure that expresses family values. Number six, discover solitary leisure that is personally restorative. Now let's change the subject just a little bit. Whose work matters to God? Well, Colossians chapter 3 says, and whatever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. In other words, all work matters to God. That work will either honor God or dishonor him. There's no such thing as neutral work. One works either with God or against God. Work which is merely putting in the time is work that works against God and his purposes. As we mentioned earlier, vocation is a calling. And who is doing the calling? Is it coming out of your own intuition, out of your desires, out of your understanding of other people's expectations? Is it the desire to seek a wealthy and comfortable end? Are you choosing the easiest option? Are you just expressing an aptitude or skill? Or is it God who calls? And that, of course, can be confirmed by your aptitude, your desire, your skills, or available options that are open to you. For there to be a callee, there must be somebody who's doing the calling, a caller. Before we're called to do something, we are called to someone. The calling of God is comprehensive and involves the whole of life. In fact, all of God's people are called under the new covenant, not just the prophets and the priests and the princesses. There is not a single incident or instance in the New Testament of a person being called to a societal occupation. Rather, that they are called to follow me without any sense of the implications of that. There's not a single incident of a person being called to be a religious professional. The criteria for church leadership is not a secret call, but the qualification of character. We see this in 1 Timothy chapter 3. God guides one into vocation in a variety of ways. He guides one by his word. Scripture tells us how to live, and the Scripture confirms certain aspects and certain characteristics of our lives. By his providential ordering of our lives. Number 3, by endowing us with gifts and talents. Number 4, by enabling us to exercise sound judgment and wisdom. And I've given a number of verses related to that. Number 5, by motivating us uniquely, giving us passion for accomplishing a particular task. And number 6, by the direct leading of the Spirit. Vocational discernment is one of the most neglected ministries in the church. Number 1, it is never merely individual self-assessment or introspection, but usually involves corporate affirmation. That is the biblical suggestion of 2 or 3 witnesses, people who affirm a certain calling for you, in that you show the gifts and the graces for doing what you are called to do. Number 2, it involves self-knowledge, listening to the voice of God, and discerning the leading of the Spirit. Number 3, it's a process that lasts an entire lifetime. Your vocational discernment necessarily involves, number 1, motivation. It involves your talents and your gifts. Certainly takes into account your personality types. And then, of course, there are certain constraints that remove certain options from you. It could be blocks and dysfunctionalities. And it could be the direct leading of the Lord. My friend Tom Basford, who heads up an organization called Significant Matters, presents to us a visual way of looking at what he calls the sweet spot of the calling in our life. This will make available in the materials section. I'd like you to examine it carefully. It shows that in these concentric circles that there is a convergence where they all overlap each other. My passion, my significant matter, and my skills and experience. My passion is that which I really feel driven to do. My significant matter would be that area of need which is out there, which somehow affects and draws me to it, where I do want to make a difference. And then my skills and experience are those particular talents and abilities that I express. One's passion includes not necessarily the items Basford suggests. Rather, the passion is born of the reality of need and the burning desire to make a contribution, to change things, to be a transformational agent. Passion comes from being both, comes from the leadership of God and the awareness of need around us. My significant matter is where I find affirmation and self-realization, a comfort level of meaning and purpose, a sense of this is really what I've been made for. This is discovered by engagement in a variety of situations that a person willingly puts himself or herself into. John Perkins, who is the father of the Christian Community Development Association, is the fellow who coined the phrase the 3 R's, and that is relocation, redistribution, and reconciliation. But he came up with this insight that I find very helpful. He says there are a lot of people who twiddle their thumbs, waiting to be zapped by some kind of special, spiritual, existential moment in which it becomes absolutely clear to them what they're supposed to do. Rather, he says that every time we pray the Lord's Prayer, we say, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is a couplet. The one phrase expresses and further expands on the other. Thy kingdom come. What does it mean, Thy kingdom come? Well, it means God's will is being done on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, wherever the will of God is being done, that is the sign of the kingdom coming. So what is God's will for your life? Well, find out where God's will is being expressed, and then go and identify with it. Throw yourself behind it. Involve yourself in it in some significant way. Let's define now what Basford means by my skills and experience. God has implanted in us certain native aptitudes that experience can develop and mature. It's important to give God the broadest range of experiences to release latent aptitudes and skills. To limit or fail to experiment may suppress gifts that God has given, so they might never develop. There's kind of a sad note with regards to Charles Darwin, of course, the evolutionist who made such tremendous contribution to scientific inquiry. But he made this statement: up to the age of 30 or beyond it, poetry of many kinds gave me great pleasure. I've also said that formerly pictures gave me considerable, and music very great delight. But now for many years I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. I have almost lost my taste for picture or music. My mind seems to become a kind of machine for grinding general laws out of large collections of facts. What's he saying? He's saying because of the inactivity in these areas, he lost the capacity for appreciation. And this is one of our dangers, that we have to nurture these particular skills, otherwise we lose them over time. One may find his or her personal calling or sweet spot through the following. One is to pray continually, to be in constant communion with God. Number 2, to gather information about yourself, your passions, your interests, your central motivations, possible occupations through reading, inventories, interviews, personal meditation, journal keeping. Another is to engage selective believers who know you well in the process of discernment. Number 4 is to clarify your own general and particular calling, its comprehensiveness, sense of oughtness, or I really was made to do this thing in a particular direction, or more likely, in more than just one direction. And then, of course, to do some kind of a scale in which you consider the negatives and the positives, those who would be advantaged or disadvantaged by this decision, as well as some very practical constraints, such as your finances, your health, your family responsibilities. And then just take time. If the decision must be made immediately, maybe you make a stopgap fill-in type of a decision, recognizing that this is not exactly where you're going to land. If you're married, seek God's leading and discuss and pray until you have some unity as a couple, as both are affected by your decision. God's goal is not to get the job done as quickly as possible, but to do so in a process that creates unity between those who are part of your family. If it's not God's will for both of us, it is probably not God's will, no matter how much one spouse believes he or she has God's guidance. I remember, as an aside, I was 15 years old. My dad was making a job change from one city to another city. And he approached me. He said, we're moving to a situation where it's a much smaller community. People will examine your life. If indeed you feel strongly that in that kind of an environment you're not going to thrive, then we won't go. I was very honored that indeed he took my own perception and I had the veto power on his job in another community. Of course, I said yes, and I went with him, and it was one of the more productive periods of my life. Number 5, be open to supernatural guidance through prophetic words, visions, dreams, definite transcendental messages from God. But don't demand any of these for decision making. And when you've decided, don't look back. If you made a mistake, God will show you this. He'll either redeem the mistake, he can even incorporate it into his revised plan for you, or move forward, or to move you forward. Quotation by Frederick Buechner: the kind of work God usually calls you to is the kind of work that you most need to do, and the world most needs to have done. Thus, the place God calls you is the place where you'll find your deepest gladness and the world's deep hunger, where they both meet together. So what are the conclusions of this particular session? Work is made meaningful by the appropriate balance between active engagement in work. Experience qualitative Sabbath, times of leisure. To determine one's calling, there is often a gestation period in one's life of brooding, experimenting, testing, a preparatory Sabbath that ultimately will bring together a convergence into that one sweet spot within one's life.